The eternal conflict, Rome and the Celtic threat. The history of Rome's rise to power is punctuated by a series of brutal conflicts with its neighbors, but few rivalries were as persistent and formative as that with the Celts. From the early sack of Rome in 390 BC by Brennus to the later clashes in the 3rd century BC, the Celts remained one of the Republic's most daunting adversaries. The Battle of Telamon in 25 BC was the culmination of centuries of hostilities. It was more than just another battle, it was a defining moment in Rome's expansion, proving that the Republic had the military, political, and diplomatic acumen to dominate not just Italy, but eventually the known world. The rise of Rome and the persistent Celtic threat. By the 3rd century BC, Rome had evolved from a city-state into the dominant force of the Italian peninsula. However, this growth was not without obstacles. The Celtic tribes of northern Italy, known collectively as the Gauls, were a persistent thorn in Rome's side. The memory of the sack of Rome by the Senones in 390 BC had never faded. The Celts were viewed as an existential threat, one that could rise again at any moment. For centuries, Rome engaged in intermittent wars with various Celtic tribes, driving them back but never fully eliminating the danger. The Celts, on the other hand, were not a unified entity. They were a collection of fiercely independent tribes, often engaged in internal conflicts. This lack of unity was a double-edged sword. It made them difficult to completely subjugate, but it also made them vulnerable to Rome's divide-and-conquer tactics. Rome understood this well and exploited tribal rivalries to weaken the Celtic resistance over time. The prelude to war. In the years leading up to 225 BC, tensions escalated once again. Rome had been expanding aggressively, pushing further north into lands previously held by the Celts. The construction of Roman colonies in former Celtic territories was seen as an act of provocation, and several tribes, particularly the Boian and Subers, decided to act. They sought allies beyond the Alps, convincing the Gaiseta, a group of mercenary warriors from modern-day France, to join their cause. The Gaiseta, lured by promises of wealth and glory, agreed. What followed was one of the largest Celtic invasions of Roman territory in history. With an army reportedly 50,000 strong, the Celts swept into Etruria, devastating the countryside and marching toward Rome. The Republic responded with characteristic efficiency. Two consuls, Lucius Aemilius Pappus and Gaius Atilius Regulus, mobilized their legions, setting the stage for a decisive confrontation at Telamon. The march to battle. The Celts, emboldened by their early successes, advanced deeper into Roman territory. However, their coalition was already showing signs of strain. While the Gaiseta were fierce warriors, they were not accustomed to the disciplined tactics of Rome's legions. Additionally, the alliance with the Boian and Subers was based on convenience rather than a shared vision, making it fragile. Rome, on the other hand, was prepared. Aemilius took command of a large force in Ariminum, while Regulus, returning from Sardinia, landed in Pisa and moved to block the Celts' retreat. The two Roman armies effectively trapped the invaders, forcing them into a battle they could not avoid. The stage is set. The Celts found themselves caught between two Roman forces, Aemilius pressing from the south and Regulus blocking their path north. Realizing the danger, they attempted to fight their way out. The battlefield near Telamon was rugged, with rolling hills providing both opportunities and challenges. The Celts positioned themselves in a defensive stance, splitting their forces into two fronts, one facing Aemilius, the other facing Regulus. What followed was a battle that would determine the fate of the Celtic presence in northern Italy. In Part 2, we will delve into the unfolding chaos of the battle, examining the strategies, the heroics, and the brutal realities of ancient warfare that made Telamon one of the bloodiest confrontations of its time. The Storm of Telamon, Rome's greatest Celtic battle. As the sun rose over the Italian peninsula into 25 BC, the fate of thousands hung in the balance. The Battle of Telamon was not merely a clash of arms, it was a struggle for survival, a test of Rome's military discipline against the raw ferocity of the Celtic warriors. With two massive armies converging, the battlefield would become a crucible of blood and iron, a collision of worlds. Rome had long feared the Celts. Since the sack of Rome in 390 BC, the specter of barbarian invasion had haunted the Republic. Despite Rome's military advancements, the Celts remained a formidable threat, their warriors fueled by tradition, honor, and a thirst for plunder. The Gaiseta, naked warriors wielding massive swords, fought not just for gold but for glory. Their allies, the Insubers and the Boii, brought seasoned warriors ready to carve their place in history. On the other side stood the Roman legions, disciplined, organized, and led by Lucius Aemilius Pappus and Gaius Atilius Regulus. The Roman war machine had evolved, and unlike in previous centuries, the Republic now had a professional, well-drilled force ready to meet the Celtic charge. The battlefield unfolds. As the Celts advanced south, they soon realized they were walking into a trap. Rome had set a perfect pincer movement. Aemilius' army pursued them from the south, while Regulus' forces blocked their retreat in the north. To their horror, the Celts realized they were caught between two Roman armies, each 40,000 strong. Panic spread through the Celtic ranks. Their leaders, the twin kings Concollatinus and Anarostus, faced a terrible choice: fight a two-front battle or attempt to break through before the trap closed completely. They chose to fight. The Celts formed into two lines, one facing north toward Regulus, the other south toward Aemilius. The Gaiseta warriors, known for their fearlessness, stripped down to fight naked, believing it would make them swifter and unencumbered in battle. Their presence alone was meant to intimidate the Romans, showcasing their utter lack of fear. Rome's lethal discipline. As the two sides closed the distance, the Roman strategy unfolded with lethal precision. Unlike the Celts, who relied on shock tactics and individual heroism, the legions fought as a single unit, their movements dictated by strict command. The Roman velites, light skirmishers, opened the battle by hurling volleys of javelins into the enemy ranks. For the Gaiseta, this was a nightmare. Their lack of armor turned them into easy targets. Javelins pierced flesh, turning the once fearsome warriors into a chaotic, bleeding mass. Some warriors broke rank and charged wildly, but they were cut down before they reached the Roman lines. Behind the velites, the Roman hastati prepared for the main engagement. Their pilum, a specialized throwing spear designed to pierce shields, tore into the Celtic front lines. As the Gaiseta reeled, the hastati surged forward, engaging in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Meanwhile, the battle on the hill raged on. Roman cavalry clashed with Celtic horsemen in a desperate struggle for control. Regulus himself fought among them, but the tide of battle was turning against him. In the chaos, Regulus was killed, his head taken as a trophy by the Celts. The turning point. Despite their losses, the Romans were winning the ground battle. The Principes, the second line of legionaries, moved in to relieve the exhausted hastati. Fresh, disciplined, and well-armored, they broke through the weakened Celtic lines. The final blow came when Aemilius' cavalry, victorious on the hill, charged into the Celtic rear. The encirclement was complete. Trapped and exhausted, the Celts could do nothing but fight to the death. By the day's end, 40,000 Celts lay dead. Another 10,000 were captured, including King Concollatinus. King Anarostus, unwilling to face the humiliation of defeat, took his own life. Aftermath and consequences. The Battle of Telamon was one of Rome's greatest victories, but it came at a cost. Though Rome had crushed the Celtic threat in northern Italy, it had also sown the seeds of future conflicts. The brutal slaughter of the Gaiseta and their allies left a lasting mark on the Celtic world. And when Hannibal crossed the Alps just a few years later, thousands of Celtic warriors eagerly joined his ranks, seeking revenge. Telamon was not just a battle, it was a warning. Rome's growing power was now undeniable, and anyone who stood in its way would face the full might of the legions. Aftermath of Telamon. Rome's path to supremacy. The dust had settled on the battlefield of Telamon. The once mighty Celtic horde lay in ruins, their leaders slain or captured, their warriors either dead or taken as prisoners. For Rome, this was more than just a victory, it was a defining moment in its relentless march toward dominance. The Republic had faced the nightmare of another Celtic invasion and emerged stronger than ever. But the consequences of this battle would stretch far beyond a single campaign, shaping the destiny of Rome, its military, and its enemies for generations to come. Rome's response. The triumph and terror. In the wake of the victory, Lucius Aemilius Pappus returned to Rome a hero. The Republic had a tradition of celebrating great military triumphs, and this one was particularly grand. Concollatinus, the defeated Celtic king, was paraded through the streets of Rome in chains. The captured Celtic warriors, now prisoners of war, were either sold into slavery or executed as a warning to others who might dare to challenge Roman authority. The Senate decreed that the victory at Telamon should be immortalized in Rome's annals, and sacrifices were made to the gods in gratitude for their divine favor. But behind the celebrations lurked a stark reality. Rome's victory had come at the cost of thousands of Roman and allied lives. And though the Celts had been defeated, they were not yet eradicated. Aemilius, keenly aware of the danger that still loomed, press the advantage. With his army still intact, he launched a campaign into the lands of the Boii, one of the most formidable Celtic tribes in northern Italy. What followed was a systematic devastation of Boii territory, with Roman forces burning villages, slaughtering warriors, and enslaving entire populations. Rome had sent a message: defiance would be met with total annihilation. The Celtic world in disarray. For the Celts, Telamon was not just a military defeat, it was a psychological catastrophe. The idea that Rome could be challenged had been shattered. The Gaiseta, who had fought for gold and glory, were no more. The Insubers and Boii, once proud and powerful tribes, now faced the reality that their lands were no longer safe. Some tribes sought peace with Rome, offering tribute and submission to avoid further destruction. Others, however, swore vengeance. The wounds of Telamon would fester for years, breeding resentment among the Celts of northern Italy and beyond. And then came Hannibal. When the Carthaginian general crossed the Alps in 218 BC, he found a willing ally in the Celtic tribes of the Po Valley. The same people who had fought and died at Telamon now rallied to his cause, eager for a chance to strike back at Rome. Hannibal's ranks swelled with thousands of Celtic warriors, many of whom had lost family members and homes in Rome's ruthless campaigns. In a way, Telamon had not ended the Celtic threat, it had merely transformed it. The Celts had become a crucial part of Rome's next great enemy, fueling the fire of the Second Punic War, the evolution of the Roman war machine. If there was one lesson Rome learned from Telamon, it was the power of strategic warfare. The battle had demonstrated the effectiveness of Rome's ability to encircle and crush an enemy through superior coordination. This was not the reckless Rome of old, engaging in battles out of pride or desperation. This was the Rome of calculated, methodical warfare, a Rome that would one day conquer the known world. The legions had proven their superiority over the Celtic warriors, but Rome would not stop there. In the years following Telamon, military reforms strengthened the Republic's forces even further. The manipular system, which had allowed Rome to adapt in battle more effectively, and the rigid Celtic formations, was refined and reinforced. Greater emphasis was placed on logistics, ensuring that Roman armies could sustain long campaigns deep in enemy territory. Perhaps most importantly, Rome had mastered the art of diplomacy as a weapon. Just as they had turned some Celtic tribes against others before Telamon, they would continue to manipulate rival factions throughout their future conquests. Divide and conquer had become a guiding principle of Roman expansion. A lesson in brutality. The sheer scale of violence at Telamon marked a turning point in how Rome conducted war. The Celts had been not just defeated, but utterly crushed. There would be no negotiation, no mercy for those who resisted. This approach would be repeated time and time again in Rome's future wars, from the destruction of Carthage to the subjugation of the Greek world. The Romans saw themselves as the rightful rulers of Italy, and any who stood in their way would be eradicated. Telamon was a warning to all Rome's future enemies. Resistance was futile. The shadow of Telamon. In the grand scheme of history, the Battle of Telamon was more than just another clash between Rome and its enemies. It was a preview of Rome's future. The Republic had faced one of its greatest threats and emerged victorious, but the ghost of Telamon would linger for decades. The Celts had been broken, but their spirit lived on in the ranks of Hannibal's army. Rome had learned to wield war as a tool of domination, a lesson that would serve it well in the coming centuries. The world had changed, and Rome was now on an unstoppable path to empire. But as history would soon show, every victory carried the seeds of future conflict. The legacy of Telamon. Rome's unstoppable march. The Battle of Telamon had been a definitive moment in Rome's military history, marking a brutal end to the immediate Celtic threat in northern Italy. However, its repercussions stretched far beyond the battlefield. The Roman Republic had not only proven its dominance, but had also embraced a new way of war, one that would shape its imperial ambitions for centuries to come. This final part explores how Telamon influenced Rome's military doctrine, its expansionist policies, and its self-perception as an unstoppable force. It was a victory that did not just define an era. It became a template for Rome's future conquests. Rome's psychological transformation. Before Telamon, Rome had always viewed itself as a vulnerable power, one that had to fight tooth and nail for survival. The trauma of the Gallic sack of Rome in 390 BC had ingrained a deep fear of the Celts, shaping Roman military and political policies for generations. Even as Rome grew stronger, the memory of that humiliation lingered, fueling an obsession with security. Telamon changed that. For the first time, Rome did not just defeat the Celts, it annihilated them. The fearsome Gaiseta warriors, once symbols of untamed barbarian ferocity, had been utterly crushed. The legions had faced the Celtic storm and emerged unscathed. This victory rewired Rome's perception of itself. No longer was it a city clinging to survival, it was now the dominant power of Italy, destined to conquer and rule. The psychological shift was profound, and it would drive Rome's future expansion into new territories with even greater confidence. The conquest of Cisalpine Gaul. One of the immediate effects of Telamon was Rome's full-scale invasion of Cisalpine Gaul. With the Celts broken, the Republic wasted no time in pushing northward, determined to eliminate any lingering threats. The systematic subjugation of the region unfolded over the next 2 decades, culminating in the decisive Battle of Clastidium 22 BC, where the Insubres, the last major Celtic power in the region, were crushed. By the end of the 3rd century BC, Rome had transformed northern Italy from a land of independent Celtic tribes into a Roman-controlled province. Towns like Mediolanum, modern Milan, and Bononia Bologna were brought under Roman rule, paving the way for future colonization. The region, once a source of terror for Rome, was now a key part of its growing empire. Rome's success in Cisalpine Gaul demonstrated a new pattern of expansion, one that would be repeated in future wars. Defeat the enemy in a decisive battle. Telamon had proven Rome's ability to crush his foes through superior strategy. Follow up with relentless campaigns. Instead of just winning a battle and retreating, Rome now understood the need for complete conquest, establish Roman control and infrastructure. After military victory, Rome founded colonies, built roads, and secured long-term dominance. This formula would become the foundation of Rome's empire-building strategy. The Hannibalic nightmare. When Celts struck back, however, despite Rome's dominance, Telamon also sowed the seeds of future disaster. The slaughter of the Celtic warriors left a deep scar on the tribes of northern Italy, filling them with a burning hatred for Rome. So when Hannibal embarked across the Alps into 18 BC to launch the Second Punic War, the Celts eagerly joined him. The very people Rome had crushed at Telamon now saw an opportunity for vengeance. Tebo, Insubres, and other Celtic tribes provided thousands of warriors to Hannibal's army, helping him deliver devastating blows to Rome in battles like Trebia to 18 BC and Cannae to 16 BC. Rome had underestimated the power of revenge. The brutality of Telamon had not destroyed the Celts, it had merely delayed their resistance. This was a lesson Rome would learn repeatedly throughout history. Conquering a people was one thing, but ensuring they stayed loyal was another. Rome's military evolution. Telamon also played a role in shaping the evolution of the Roman military. The battle had demonstrated the effectiveness of several key elements that would define Roman warfare for centuries. The manipular formation, the checkerboard arrangement of hastati, principes, and triarii had allowed the Romans to adapt dynamically during battle. Unlike the Celts, who relied on overwhelming charges, the legions operated with a methodical and structured approach. Heavy infantry supremacy. The battle proved that disciplined heavy infantry could withstand and ultimately break wild, charging foes. This realization would shape Rome's military identity as it faced future enemies like the Carthaginians, Macedonians, and Parthians. The importance of cavalry coordination. The Roman victory was secure when their cavalry took control of the battlefield. This reinforced the need for Rome to invest in better cavalry units in area where they had traditionally been weaker than their enemies. Psychological warfare. Rome now understood the importance of completely demoralizing an enemy. The public execution of prisoners and the triumphs displaying Celtic kings in chains were not just for celebration, they were meant to terrify Rome's enemies into submission. Telamon had been a laboratory for Rome's evolving military doctrine, and the lessons it provided would be carried into the future wars that would define the Republic and Empire. The road to empire. Rome's unstoppable drive. With Telamon, Rome had broken the back of its oldest enemy. The Celts had once been the great terror of the Republic, but now they were just another conquered people, folded into Rome's growing dominion. More importantly, Rome had solidified its identity as an expansionist power. No longer content with defending its borders, the Republic now looked outward, seeking new lands to dominate. In the decades that followed, Rome expanded into Iberia, beginning the wars that would eventually bring Hispania under its control. The Republic launched campaigns in Illyria and Greece, bringing the Hellenistic world into its orbit. By the end of the 2nd century BC, Rome was no longer just an Italian power, it was on its way to ruling the Mediterranean. The spirit of Telamon lived on in every Roman conquest, The idea that Rome could, and should, be the dominant force in the world was no longer in question. The Republic had tasted true power, and it would never look back. The legacy of Telamon in history. Telamon remains one of the most significant battles of the ancient world, not because of its sheer scale, but because of what it represented. It was the moment Rome fully embraced its destiny as a conquering power. It also stands as a reminder of the brutal cycle of history. The Celts had once been Rome's greatest terror, only to be defeated and subjugated. But their defiance did not die. It resurfaced in the form of new wars, new alliances, and new enemies. Rome would face the same pattern again with Carthage, with Greece, and eventually with its own internal factions. Telamon was a victory, but it was also a warning. No empire, no matter how strong, is ever free from the ghosts of its past. The birth of Roman invincibility. Telamon was not just a battle, it was a turning point. It forged the Roman mindset that would drive the Republic and later the Empire to unprecedented heights. The idea that Rome could and should dominate became ingrained in its very fabric. In the end, Telamon was more than a war between Rome and the Celts. It was the battle where Rome truly became Rome, the ruthless, calculating, and unstoppable force that would shape the world for the next 500 years. And so, as the legions marched forward into history, the lessons of Telamon were never forgotten.